Hello, Cleveland. Welcome to the Dawgland podcast. I am your host, Anthony Joki, finally returning after a few episodes here. As always, got my co-host Jackson McCurry alongside me. Jack, how are we doing today?
Doing good, man. Just glad that the 2024 edition of the Browns is done and over with, and we are rolling into the off season, and it's going to be an eventful one for sure. There's a lot that this franchise needs to do, and hopefully gets this thing turned back around, and we're back in the playoffs a year from now. But all in all, life's good, man. How about you?
Life is good. I was up in Michigan this past weekend. Had a great time. Can't really ask for much of a better time than I had. So, which is weird to say about Michigan, right? Especially with the sweatshirt I'm wearing. It's hard to talk good about Michigan, but I had a very good time up there. Meeting my girlfriend's family and whatnot. So it was a great trip. Um, you know, Always tough to say goodbye for sure, but um, we have a lot of opportunity to talk about the Browns here. I did listen to the two podcasts on my drive up there with you and Jack Duffin and the other one as well. So I was with Jacob. I blanked on a name for a second. But uh, so I got my fill of the podcast while I was making that drive. But there's nothing like being back here in this driver's seat, hosting this podcast, and we do have some things to discuss because they haven't been touched upon yet. And first, after the game on Saturday, the Browns dismissed offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey as well as offensive line coach Andy Dickerson after both being with the team for only one season. Not much of a surprise with either one. I know there were kind of rumblings about Andy kind of earlier on in the season with the offensive line struggling. Obviously, two areas overall offensively that struggled, the offense as a whole, but offensive line as well. What are your thoughts about them deciding to move on from both of these guys after just one season with the Browns?
Like you said, it really wasn't a surprise that it was going to happen. I mean, we know like they tried to change things up offensively by when they dismissed Van Pelt and Callahan and Stump Mitchell last year, and they bring in Ken Dorsey to try to tailor the offense more for Deshaun Watson. And lo and behold, once Deshaun gets hurt, then that's when they made the switch to have Dorsey call plays. We saw some peaks, some flashes with Jameis Winston at quarterback, but all in all, just the offense never really had a flow under this hybrid scheme that Dorsey and Stefanski tried to create, and it just wasn't successful. I mean, like we said, Jameis had his moments, wasn't it? And then the turnovers started happening. They go to DTR, and the offense just flatlined. There was no sense of movement, abilities to score points with DTR or Zappy in there at quarterback in the finale. But it just seemed like, and you could hear the players like vent their frustrations, especially Sunday morning when they got together, and Batonio and Conklin and some of the other guys were saying that they needed to go back to what Stefanski knew best, and I think that's ultimately what they're going to do. It's more of a run attack, play action style offense, like the zone schemes that you've seen in Minnesota, San Francisco with the Kubiaks, the Shanahans, etc. I just think that's you got to go back to what Stefanski knows how to do. And as far as Dickerson goes, like the fact, Anthony, that a couple weeks ago we saw that Mike Vrabel was essentially calling or coaching the offensive line. I think they just kind of told you the writing was on the wall for Dickerson. And, he did his best. Obviously, there was a lot of injuries on the line throughout the season, but ultimately they were going to make changes on the offensive side. It's going to be interesting to see what ultimately happens. Whose decision is that going to be? Is that going to be Stefanski's? He talked about more of a collaborative effort with Andrew Barry and others. So it's going to be interesting to see A, who they pick, and B, what does that ultimately mean for the offense? Does it go back to Stefanski being in control, or is it where he gives up the play calling again to somebody that he ultimately trusts to ran the offense so Stefanski can be more of a CEO type head coach?
Yeah, you talk about the offensive line there and the injuries. Not only were players like Jed Wills hurt. on the O line, but a lot of guys that they had signed to be backups also got hurt early on in the season as well. So the depth of the O line really struggled. Obviously, the quarterback play is the main focus of all this. Um, where do you see them going in terms of offensive coordinator? Do you see them trying to find somebody that suits what Kevin has done best and getting back to that run scheme and the play action? Do you see them kind of waiting to see where the quarterback situation ends up this offseason through free agency through the draft? Do you find an offensive coordinator that suits whoever they get their best needs in terms of fit? Where do you see this going? Do you see this taking a while, or do you see it being a rather kind of quick process?
I think it's going to be a quick process because the one candidate that we know for sure that's interviewing is Tommy Reese, the tight ends coach for the Browns. Was being heavily courted by North Carolina before Bill Belichick ultimately agreed to the job. There's rumors out there that Mike Vrabel is looking at potentially bringing Reese along as an offensive coordinator. So I would have to think. And I think this might come down to a play calling situation. Like, if Stefanski's comfortable with Reese calling the plays, I could see this process going really quickly. But I do think it's a situation where I think Stefanski, it's going to be Stefanski driven. I think he wants to run the offense and call the plays again, but I think he will give it up for the right person. But could that be Tommy Reese? I don't know. He's never called plays in the NFL. He's got the experience in college, but other than that, I mean, Alex Van Pelt is available once again because the Patriots fired him after the game Sunday, along with Gerard Mayo after just one season. The Kubiaks are available. Clint is down in New Orleans as the offensive coordinator, and he'll be available. Clay, Clint's brother, is the passing game specialist with the 49ers, and Shanahan lets him call plays in the preseason before. And we've seen the Niners pipeline as far as assistant coaches becoming coordinators and then ultimately head coaches. And then I've heard Josh McCown's name floated around, and he's the QB coach in Minnesota. So, uh, and Kevin O'Connell runs somewhat of a similar scheme that Stefanski has run here in the past. So I think they're going to go back to what made Stefanski successful as both offensive coordinator and head coach. I think it'll be that style. It's just a matter of, does play calling matter to these candidates, or are they willing to come just be a part of what has been somewhat successful? Obviously, we've had our downs here in the 5 years with Stefanski, but ultimately, I think they go in that direction and try to get back to that identity of running the ball, great offensive line play, play action passing. And I don't think it matters to the quarterback as much because I think we've seen that offensive style, Anthony, has made average quarterbacks look above average. And I don't think it's so much about catering the system to the quarterback as much as making the quarterback fit in the scheme.
It almost seems like, they, and I think it's been discussed before, they kind of need like a point guard as their quarterback. Whatever that might be this offseason, hopefully they can find that. Um, Obviously, I don't think that's on the roster. So they're gonna have to find somebody this offseason. In terms of Andrew Berry spoke to the media. Was that Sunday, Monday? I think it was Monday.
Monday.
Um, so he had quite a handful of variety of topics to that he went over, and the most headline worthy one is that Deshaun Watson suffered a setback in his recovery from his Achilles injury, um, which puts which puts into question his status for next season. Is this a surprise, or is this kind of them maybe covering the tracks because most of that money is insured that the Browns could get back if he doesn't play next year? I think I saw a figure, don't know how accurate it is, but about 44 million could come back to the Browns in terms of salary cap relief if he doesn't play because of this injury. What's your sense of all this?
It was definitely eyebrow raising. I was at work, and of course I get tweet notifications, and that was in the first like opening minutes of the press conference, and they were like, Watson's had a setback, and it was definitely eyebrow raising. Like nobody knew this was coming. And I do think so. There's the thing, like I've heard different things over the last couple weeks saying like Watson's going to be the guy next year, which I was kind of skeptical of just because of his whole original recovery process. And then some of the national media people, Adam Schefter, Diana Rossini, come out and saying the Browns were going to be in the quarterback market no matter what. And Zach Jackson has said that too locally. Like you had to believe it. Like you had to believe that they were kind of just done with the whole process of the Deshaun Watson era. And I wrote about this Monday night on the northcoastsports.com. Like this injury just solidifies it, Anthony, the setback. It's because you look at the timetable now, he suffered the injury in late October. It takes 6 months for someone with an Achilles rupture to walk normally. It takes 6 months. That's how long. And then for a football player, it's and any like high impact activities, it's a 9 month recovery process. Um, so you're looking at late July already. Now that there's a setback, we don't know the severity of it. Um, I You heard Andrew Berry say that they're gathering information. He's going on the pup list at a minimum to start training camp, and I would say he's probably not going to be ready for the regular season. So I just think this is over. Like I think it is completely over at this point. Yes, he's on the roster because of the 92 million guaranteed left because of the significant cap numbers, but Watson's not going to be in their plans. I don't think, and if he is, right, and if they're still holding on to hope, then they're going to get what's coming to them at the end of the 2025 season because that's just a stupid way to go about. Like they're going to bring in multiple quarterbacks this offseason, probably at least one in free agency and one in the draft, and they may add another veteran. But Deshaun Watson's done. And I just think like anybody that's still holding on to that hope needs to just let it go because I don't see how you can factor him into their 2025 plans at all anymore because of this setback. And I forget who it was. They said surgery is potentially on the table, which they still have to collect information and probably have to do some medical stuff with their own team with Deshaun. But like any setback, like you can't go into training camp and be like, well, he's going to be a few weeks out, but we're going to prep him as if he's the starter. Like that's just a terrible mindset to have if they're thinking that at all still in the organization.
Yeah, it's definitely a big surprise to hear that, and I guess we'll see where they go in terms of acquiring a quarterback. And I know we've kind of started the draft talk. You and Jacob did last week. He
Hmm.
gave his thoughts on the quarterbacks in this class. I'm sure you and I are going to do a deep dive here with some of the guys that are available in both the draft and free agency as well to kind of figure out where the Browns go from here. So um, we'll see how that all shakes out. Some of the other things that he talked about, there was a lot that was made about, and rightfully so, about what Miles Garrett talked about, his quotes, and Andrew Barry also touched on that because he was asked about it. And one of the things he said um, about Miles is he said, in quote, so let me say in terms of Miles, my expectation is that he'll have a direct ticket from Cleveland to Canton at the end of his years and expect him to be here and retire as a Brown, quite frankly. Um, so, you know, there's been much made about what Miles said about not wanting to go through a rebuild. With where they're at, they do have a lot of core pieces that they have. Whether that be Judy at receiver, Garrett at the end, Denzel Ward, just to start the list there. Um, do you think that they would be able to retool in maybe say a year's time to where they're not going through a full rebuild? Is that possible in one off season, or do you think it could take one plus off seasons to kind of steer this back towards the right way?
So I know, and even I find myself at times during the course of this season to be like, yeah, they have to go through like a major rebuild. And I I think when you talk about a major rebuild, you go back to what we went through in 2016 and 17, going 1-31, selling off assets, collecting draft picks, acquiring cap space. I don't think they have to do that. Like I did the numbers, and even like I'm sure we'll have Jack Duffin on at some point to talk about like the maximum cap space we can have. We're gonna have around at least like 70 million if we restructure like Watson and Ward alone, and that's it. But like we have the most draft capital right now because of where we're positioned in the draft with our draft picks. I think we at least have four top 100 picks. Would like to get more via a trade down from the 2 pick, which I'm sure we'll talk about that a lot over the next couple of months. But I don't think this team's far off. Like yes, they have to tinker some things. If they go back to a Stefanski style, I think that means you're going to have to invest in the offensive line. You're going to have to invest in some tight end depth, some running back depth, but I don't think this team's far away. I think the defense is still really good. I think, a lot of people said they took a step back, but I think a lot of it had to do with the offensive struggles. You're going to have to get the quarterback position right, whether that's finding a solid bridge like a Kirk Cousins, as well as a rookie, whether that's at a 2 pick, whether it's via trade down or finding somebody in the middle rounds of the draft, a diamond in the rough, so to speak. But I don't think this team's far away. Like I feel like they can get it done in an off season if they make some solid picks with those top 100 selections, maybe finding a diamond in the rough on day 3, and then continuing to build upon the foundation that's already here. Like you said, the core pieces like Miles and Ward and Jerry Judy and David Njoku. And if Batonio and Teller come back, I think that would be good for the offensive line. JOK coming back, hopefully from his neck injury. Like the cupboard's not bare here. Like I know people think we need to tear it down to the studs and do that again. I don't think that's the case. Like I think there's core pieces here. You have to hit on these draft picks, find a couple solid free agent signings. And I think the Browns could be right back in the playoff hunt, but getting the quarterback position right is the biggest thing that they have to do this offseason.
Uh, yeah, the quarterback is obviously the most important piece, and they have to figure out who fits that best this all season. Whether it's the draft, free agency combination of the two, a trade, we'll see. Um, One of the more interesting questions that was asked, and it doesn't say who had asked it, but the question was along the lines of where you guys are in the draft. How does the last 3 years of not having a first round pick sort of impact or influence how you guys will treat both the number 2 pick, but also what you do? And Barry's response was certainly when you're in a deficit from a draft asset perspective, it can create certain challenges. That's not necessarily how we would look at this point, not necessarily in terms of trying to catch up, so to speak. We probably look at like, okay, as we analyze the roster, who are our core players short term and long term? What are some of the areas we would need to make some immediate improvements versus, hey, this is something that's maybe a longer term need and really operate from there. So, obviously with the number 2 pick, you're not going to get like the consensus number one quarterback if there even is a consensus number one. I know there's two guys who that could be, but if somebody really wants the other quarterback, there definitely could be an opportunity to move back a few spots and grab somebody like a Mason Graham, somebody like a Abdul Carter, um, uh, Will Johnson, the corner out of Michigan. So there's certainly an opportunity there. Um, do you think because they haven't had a first round pick in a few years here that if they're able to acquire maybe one, obviously moving back a few spots, but one next year, that's the route that they go?
Oh, definitely. I think I wouldn't be shocked if they went that route because they like to collect assets. Like we've seen this in the beginning stages of the 1-31 build tear down, like when they traded back from 2 in 2016 and collected draft picks, which gave them multiple ones in 2017. Uh And then they traded down again, which led them to have multiple ones in 2018, which got them to Baker and Denzel. Like, they're going to look at every avenue. Like, if they're at two, if they like one of the quarterbacks or they like both quarterbacks, they'll probably stay there. Like 2016, everybody was pissed that they didn't stay and just take Carson Wentz when they only like Jared Goff. Like, they did not like Carson Wentz. They didn't value him as a quarterback. Paul DePodesta said that publicly. 2017, they wanted Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes or Kansas City jumped Cleveland and New Orleans. So Deshaun Watson was on the board. Browns didn't want Deshaun Watson. They moved back, got an extra one, took, I think it was Jabril Peppers that year. And then 2018, Houston's pick ended up being fourth overall, and they got Denzel Ward. So, like, you don't have to force the pick if it's not right for them. If they like Cam Ward, he goes number one, and they don't really like Shador or vice versa, I could see them trading that pick, moving back, getting a guy like you said, like Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, maybe McMillan or Luther Burden, one of the receivers, or maybe one of the offensive tackles. And if they pick up an extra one, it's a good problem to have in 2026 when you could potentially have Arch Manning, Drew Aller, Garrett Nussmeier, and several other quarterbacks in the mix. And if you have an extra first round pick, like, that's a good problem to have instead of forcing a pick that is a player that you just don't have a infatuation for.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to collect some more assets, and we'll take a look and see, what the number two pick has netted over the years. There's quite a few good examples that we'll be able to take a look at here. The RG3 trade being one of them.
Yes,
I don't
the
know.
when we traded with Philly for Carson Wentz.
Yeah, so I don't know if that could be the opportunity, but we'll definitely dive through all of that going forward. Um, is there anything else that you wanted to touch upon that was talked about here in the last few days? Um, with these press conferences and the end of the season.
No, I think we hit it on like the key stuff, obviously with the firings, the Watson news, and some other notes from the Barry press conference. But maybe we come back here in a few more days, sit down, and maybe we'll have some more clarity on the offensive coordinator situation, and hopefully some more clarity on the Watson injury news. Maybe some more details, and kind of try to put it all together and see what the Browns will do next.
I do have one more question for you.
Gotcha.
So Penn State plays in the college football semifinal on Thursday night against Notre Dame. Do you see a scenario where there's a third quarterback added to this mix come here in these next couple weeks?
I was hoping you would ask me that because obviously, like, the Drew Aller stuff is a big thing because last week during their game against Boise State, I think it was Dane Brugler said, like, there's some teams that have Aller as the number one quarterback, and it's not a lock that he's going to stay in school, which obviously he did. His backup transferred and went somewhere else to go have an opportunity to play. If he has another great game against Notre Dame Thursday night, and then they go to the national, even if win or lose, if he has a great game, I think that's gonna,
Which
you know,
Notre Dame has a great defense, by the way.
without a doubt, if he has a great game against that defense, which played really good against Georgia, obviously it helped them win. I think that's going to create some more buzz for him. And then if they go to the national championship, and whether it's Ohio State or Texas, because I think the Buckeyes have a good chance to win. But if it's either way, like, and he has another stellar performance, like, he may want to rethink it because he could go first round. Like, I know some of the mocks, he was like a third or fourth round pick before he ultimately decided to say he was going to stay. But if he has a stellar college football playoff the way he has, and like, yes, he's still raw as a prospect, but if people tell him, like, hey, you can go top 10, you might even be the first quarterback off the board, like, he's got to reassess his thoughts. I don't know what his NIL situation is at Penn State, but if you have a chance to go top 5 when you were looking at being potentially a third, fourth round pick before you recommitted to them, like, it'd be hard pressed. I mean, like, I like him. I think he's still raw, like I said, as a prospect, but there's things to like about him, including his arm strength. But it's going to be interesting just to see what ultimately happens here in the next potentially 10 days for Drew Aller. And I don't know when the deadline is for players to have to declare for the draft, but This could be very interesting time for him for sure, and for teams wanting him to enter the draft.
How much of a temptation would it be for somebody like him who grew up in Medina, a big time Browns fan, uh, to have the Browns there, probably taking the second quarterback in the draft? Um, how tempting is that for him?
I'm sure it's tempting. I mean, we went through it in 2017 with Mitch Trubisky, obviously coming from Menor, Brady Quinn in '07, Charlie Fry in '05. Like we've had it countless times since uh, the Bernie draft in '85. But I mean, I think he most like anybody else wants to go to the right place. Like, yes, going home, awesome story. We've dealt that several times since '99 with hometown quarterbacks or home state quarterbacks, but I think ultimately right now he's got to do what's best for him. And whether it's coming to Cleveland, going somewhere else in the team, he probably wants to go someplace where he's got a great fit and a great chance to win, not just right away, but for a long time. And if he thinks that's the Browns and they can somehow manipulate it, awesome. But I know there's a lot of Browns fans that are just only wanting him because he's from Northeast Ohio. But you got to look at him just as a player, not just as somebody that could be the next hometown hero.
It's interesting. We've been looking for a quarterback since Bernie, who also from Ohio.
Yep,
Maybe the guy is also from Ohio. We'll see.
could
Um,
be.
and I wanted to mention too, in terms of trading back, can we trade back for a 2027 first round pick that will turn into Jeremiah Smith? Can we somehow make sure that happens?
Like I said last week with Jacob, if we can get a 2027 an extra first somehow, whether it's Jeremiah Smith or Ryan Williams from Alabama, one of those guys needs to be an orange and brown.
I had this thought while I was driving, listening to that podcast. Um, do you ever see a scenario with how college football is? You know how the NBA you can draft players and kind of hold on the rights to them, especially the international players. Do you ever see a scenario where, and maybe we could talk about it more down the road, but where you could, with the NIL and stuff, them being like semi-pro athletes, and this happens in baseball too, where you draft kids out of high school, and then they can decide, whether to go pro or go to college or whatnot. Where guys coming out of high school could be draft eligible, and you could hold on to the rights for a couple years until they spend a couple years in college.
I've always thought about this and I don't know how it would work. I think obviously we're heading towards where college football, like you said, is basically going to be semi pro. Like they've probably talked about this super league. It won't shock me within the next 10 years if there's some sort of collective bargaining agreement. Um, it would be interesting. I'm reading a book on the USFL, and originally they were just like the teams were going to, you can only have players on your roster from like whatever, like a territorial system based on where your USFL team is located. I could see something like that happening down the road, but I feel like that would take a lot of legal ramifications. And I don't know if it would be something that like prospects, players, whatever you want to call it, would agree to terms on something like that. But it's definitely an interesting thought. Um, I don't know. Like, I never thought that college players will ultimately get paid, and they are now. And we're heading towards having like a super league between the Big Ten and the SEC essentially. So who knows, man? Like it would be a crazy thought. Like just be like, hey, Ohio's or the Browns are drafting this kid and he's gonna go play college ball. But the Browns are gonna hold his rights for a couple years or something. So it's an interesting thought, but I've never thought like too deep into it, honestly.
I wonder if we'll get a scenario where how the NBA has the G League Ignite teams, and somehow moving towards some things working out that way, where you get drafted, you go there, and they kind of have like a small league or something, which could be like the USFL or something like that. Um, I don't know, but I could imagine, like you said, within the next 10 years, we could certainly see a clearer picture of all of that. Especially when you have some of these really amazing young talents like Jeremiah Smith or Ryan Williams down in Alabama as well, where they
Or
could,
Arch Manning.
yeah, I mean these guys could step on the NFL field tomorrow and probably be pretty decent. Maybe the physicality might get them a little bit at start, but um, the talent is definitely pro ready already, and they're only freshmen. So
Without question.
It'd be curious to see how that turns out. All right. As we get on out of here, be sure to follow Jack on Twitter at JackMcCurry08. Give me a follow at Anthony Joki, Joki. Be sure to give the Dawgland a follow at the handle the Dawgland on X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all of those. If you would, remember until next time, as always, go Browns.
Go Browns.